Imagine discovering that a soft drink company once owned one of the largest military fleets in the world. Not a country, not a dictator, not a secret organization, a soda company. At one point in history, Pepsi became the owner of submarines, warships, and military vessels that previously belonged to the Soviet Union. Sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's completely true. And that's only the beginning. Because the story of Pepsi is not just about a sweet drink, it's a story about Cold War politics, billion-dollar deals, global influence, and how a company selling flavored sugar water managed to enter places where even governments struggled to gain access. This is the unbelievable story of Pepsi, the brand that somehow found itself in the middle of global power struggles. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to the Cold War. For decades, the world was divided into two camps. On one side stood the United States. On the other, the Soviet Union. The two superpowers competed in everything: military strength, technology, space exploration, ideology, and influence. But there was one thing almost nobody expected to become part of this battle: soft drinks. In 1959, the United States organized an exhibition in Moscow. The goal was simple: show Soviet citizens the benefits of American consumer culture. Among the many exhibits was a relatively young beverage company called Pepsi. The company's executive, Donald Kendall, had a bold idea. If Soviet citizens could taste Pepsi, maybe one day they would want it. But there was one problem. Virtually nobody in the Soviet Union knew what Pepsi was. Then, something extraordinary happened. During the exhibition, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev visited the American pavilion. There, cameras captured him drinking Pepsi. The image spread around the world. Without realizing it, Khrushchev had just created one of the most famous marketing moments in history. For Pepsi, it was priceless. Suddenly, the company had achieved something no advertisement could buy. It had reached directly into the heart of America's biggest rival. But selling Pepsi in the Soviet Union would prove far more complicated. The Soviet ruble was not freely convertible into Western currencies. That meant the Soviet government couldn't simply pay Pepsi with dollars. Most companies would have walked away. Pepsi didn't. Instead, it found a solution that would become legendary: a massive barter deal. The Soviet Union would give Pepsi the rights to sell Russian vodka in the United States. In return, Pepsi would sell its products inside the Soviet Union. Think about that for a moment. One of the largest capitalist brands on Earth was doing business with one of the most powerful communist states in history. And it was working. By the 1970s and 1980s, millions of Soviet citizens were drinking Pepsi. For many people behind the Iron Curtain, it became one of the first major American products they ever experienced. It wasn't just a beverage. It was a symbol, a small taste of another world. But the story gets even stranger. As the Soviet Union approached collapse in the late 1980s, the original barter arrangements became increasingly difficult. New agreements had to be negotiated, and this time vodka alone wasn't enough. The Soviet government offered something else: military vessels. Yes, actual military vessels. The deal included submarines, destroyers, frigates, and tanker ships. For a brief period, Pepsi technically controlled a fleet larger than the navy of many countries. The joke became famous. One Pepsi executive reportedly told US officials, "We're disarming the Soviet Union faster than you are." It sounded absurd. Yet the situation was very real. Of course, Pepsi had no intention of becoming a military power. The ships were eventually sold for scrap. But the symbolism was extraordinary. A soft drink company had become involved in one of the strangest business transactions in modern history. Yet Pepsi's influence extended far beyond the Soviet Union. Throughout the 20th century, corporations increasingly became global actors. Some had revenues larger than the economies of entire nations. They shaped culture, advertising, consumer habits, and sometimes even political conversations. Pepsi became one of the most recognizable symbols of American capitalism. Its advertisements featured celebrities, athletes, and music icons. From Michael Jackson to Britney Spears. From football stars to Hollywood actors. The company wasn't just selling drinks, it was selling identity. Youth, rebellion, coolness, a lifestyle. This strategy transformed Pepsi into a global giant, but it also created fierce competition, especially with its greatest rival, Coca-Cola. The battle between Pepsi and Coca-Cola became one of the most famous corporate wars ever fought. For decades, both companies spent billions trying to win consumers. Marketing campaigns became increasingly aggressive. Each side attempted to convince the world that its product was superior. The rivalry became so intense that it earned its own name, the Cola Wars. And in many ways, these wars mirrored larger struggles happening around the world. Competition, influence, expansion, control of markets, control of attention, control of culture. Because in the modern era, power doesn't always come from governments. Sometimes it comes from brands. Today, Pepsi products are sold across hundreds of countries and territories. The company influences global supply chains, advertising industries, entertainment partnerships, and consumer trends. Its logo is recognized by billions. Yet perhaps the most fascinating part of the story is how unlikely it all seems. Who would have predicted that a beverage company would help open economic connections between the United States and the Soviet Union? Who would have imagined that a corporation would one day own submarines? Who would have believed that a simple soft drink could become part of Cold War history? And that is what makes Pepsi's story so remarkable. Not because it secretly controlled the world, not because it organized revolutions, but because reality turned out to be stranger than most conspiracy theories. The story of Pepsi reveals something important about the modern world. Influence isn't always exercised through armies. Sometimes it spreads through products, through culture, through brands, through ideas, and occasionally through a bottle of soda. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the incredible stories hidden behind the world's most powerful companies, leaders, and historical events. And tell us in the comments, was Pepsi's Soviet submarine deal the strangest business transaction in history? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.